Exemption of duties. When we say exemption, it is the process of freeing or state of being free from an obligation. Exemption of duties means duties are to be fulfilled readily unless compliance prevented by a strong and just a reason. For example, a student has to attend his class unless sickness prevents him from doing so. A driver must observe his speed limits unless he is rushing a dying person to a hospital. While the person concerned has to decide for himself when he may claim exemption. Such claim should never be arbitrary or whimsical. To guide us on our decision on the matter, some general principles are proposed. First is negative duties arising from negative natural law admit no exemption. The second is affirmative duties arising from affirmative precepts of natural law admit exemptions when the act is rendered impossible under certain circumstances or would involve excessive hardships on the person. The last is ordinary hardships which come along with the performance of a duty do not exempt one from complying with such day. Okay, let's proceed to the conflict of duty. It happens sometimes that a person is confronted with several duties, which must be complied with at the same time. In this situation, person must learn how to prioritize his duties. The following guidelines will be proposed. First, its duties towards God must be given priority over those towards men. Second is, duties that secure public order or common good have priority over those safeguard the individual. Third is, duties toward the family and relatives take precedence over those strangers. Fourth is, duties of greater importance take precedence those of lesser importance. Duties based on higher law take precedence over those coming from lower laws.
So we are now in chapter 11 with the content of love of God. Love of God is a duty to God. So from the previous reporter, they discussed about duty. So duty, it is a moral obligation that is incumbent upon a person to do. So it is our duty to love God. So before I proceed, I will discuss first the meaning of religion. So the word religion comes from the Latin word religare, or to bind back. Religio or religion implies a bond, a relationship or fellowship between man and God. Subjectively, or in simplest definition, it is a perception or experience of the internal, while objectively, it is a perception or experience of the external. So subjectively, knowing, loving, and serving. Objectively, beliefs, ritual, moral practices, and laws. So in this sense, religion is equivalent to creed or faith. It is creed which differentiates different churches or sects such as Buddhism, Catholicism, Protestantism, and their ramifications, or in another term, it is a consequence or result. So worship of God. It is the proclamation of the glory of God. Internal, making an act of faith and mental prayer and praise of God. While external, so it is an act that can be seen like fasting, kneeling down in prayer, and giving alms to the poor. So private, when it's done by the individual by his own private initiative. So it is already understandable. So public, when it's done in participation with other men, in communal adoration or homage of God, like processions of image, offering of sacrifice, and religious service.
Worship of God as the duty involves the duty of knowing, loving, and serving God. As a worshiper of God, every moment implies the duty of knowing, loving, and serving God. First, the duty of knowing God. Man has a natural tendency in worship God. This implies that he has a natural capacity of knowing God. So, man knows God so that he can worship Him. He had a capacity of knowing Him. Natural if it is the conclusion of human reason operating on its own powers. It is natural na lahat tayo ay kilala ang Panginoon, with or without a deep relationship with Him. Supernatural when it is based on divine revelation that as own truths made known to man by God Himself. Supernatural when God operates a deep divine revelation to a man involving of knowing Him. Second, the duty to love God. Loving God in a religious sense means being attached to Him. Thus, love of God is a personal response to His presence. So, it means to live in a holiness and religious manner as the duty of loving God deeply. Third, the duty to serve God. As a personal response to the godness of God, religion moves us to seek the likeness of God in other persons. So it means to serve God is a choice. We're a servant of God, preach and spread the gospel. Moral acts are tendencies of movements towards God. A good act that can be gladness of God. Immoral acts are tendencies away from God. An evil act where God can't be glad. Certain actions are called acts of religion or acts of worship. These are devotion, prayer, adoration, sacrifices. So these are the effective way to be a better in worshiping God. Institutional religion, a group of believers subscribing to the same faith, practices, rituals, and discipline constitute a sect or church. This refers to the religious group or organization and plays an important part in society culture.
So this is the continuation of love of God. So what do you mean by love of God? So we have love of our God. So we have freedom of religion. We all know that all of us have a freedom of religion. So it simply means that the state may not interfere with the religious liberties of the people. So, ito lamang ay nangangahulugang ang isang estado ay hindi maaaring magambala kasama ang relihiyosong kalayaan ng mga tao. So next is, it means that the state may not regulate, promote, prohibited, or discriminate against people on account of their religious beliefs. So, maaaring hindi umayos o pagbawal o makilala laban sa mga tao sa kanilang relihiyosong paniniwala. So, the next is religious tolerance. So, what do you mean by religious tolerance? Tolerance, it means pauubaya. So, kumbaga, ipauubaya na lang natin ang ating mga kasalanan or ating kabutihan or ating mga kasamaang loob sa Panginoon. So, it is religious tolerance when we recognize the faith of another as his cherished possessions, truly belonging to him, as an act of his spirit which is essentially free. So, kumbaga ay ang ating mga kasalanan or ating mga kabutihan ay ipapaubaya na lang natin sa Panginoon. It is a religious tolerance when instead of facing our faith upon another, we allow him to be enlightened so that his desire to appreciate in our faith becomes a volunteer desire. It is religious tolerance when instead of underscoring our differences of opinion, we join hands instead both in prayer and in action so that the common good of mankind is served. So, kung marami man tayong mga kasalanan, dapat manghingi tayo ng kapatawaran. Kasi tayo ay isang tao lamang. Dapat manghingi tayo ng patawad dahil ang Diyos lang ang nakakaalam kung ano ang tunay nating kasalanan. So, yun lang po.